Welcome to the Shergroup podcast, where we share ideas on how to help businesses grow and prosper in the online world. Join host, Chief Shergroupie Claire Sambrook as she discusses her digital journey and how Shergroup is helping thousands to keep their business flowing and growing. Here on the Shergroupie podcast.
So, hello everyone, and welcome to this edition of Shergroup on the Sofa. I hope wherever you are in the world, you're having a good week. It's nearly Friday where I am in Florida today, and I always like the end of the week. It's always a little more relaxed than Mondays. So, as we get into the interview, I'm going to introduce my special guest, John Kim, today, who is out of Canada. And he's going to tell us about his journey in business and his company. And John is going to be one of the speakers at the World Credit Congress, which we are hosting in Orlando in October. But before we get into the interview, as I always do in these YouTube shows, I'd just like to give a shout out to my number one and Shergroup's number one fan, Mr. Ross Saunders, who is in Norwich, England, UK today. So, hey, Rossi. Hope you're having a good week. And I think John just wants to say a little hello as well.
Hi, Ross. How are you? Hope you're doing well. And I understand you're a big football fan. So go Norwich City, go.
Yeah, okay. I love that. John, have you got a favorite football team?
Actually, I love international football.
Okay.
And for me, the traditionals have always been good. But, because football or soccer, as they call it in Canada, is only starting to get big. I mean, I'm 61 years old now. When I immigrated to Canada in 69, I played soccer religiously, and it was never a big sport back then. But it's really catching on in the last 10, 15, 20 years now, I guess.
Yeah.
And so my biggest exposure is I just love the Euro Cup and the World Cups. So it's always been the kind of the flavor of the day there, and the countries and the great players that have been around. So over the years, of course, Argentina, Brazil, France, etc. So yeah, no one specific that I really root for, but it goes crazy here in Canada during World Cup. Because we've got such a huge ethnicity in the country.
Yeah.
So you've got the Italians and the French and the Portuguese and the Spanish. They just have all these groups, and it's a big festival. I imagine it's like that everywhere in the world, but it is really big here in Canada from that perspective.
Well, in the UK, we definitely split into 4 tribes: English, Scottish, Welsh, and Northern Ireland.
And I guess you stay right there in that circle.
Yeah, so there isn't a Team GB for the World Cup, as you know. It's these 4 countries, which are pretty small, but obviously very influential in the world of soccer.
Absolutely.
But it's good to know that soccer is spreading around the globe, because it's an easy game to get access to. It's just a ball and a couple of nets, and you're good, right? Whereas American footballs are a little more complex.
Or any other sport for that matter. I mean, if you think about golf or even tennis, for the most part, there's a barrier to get in because it's an expensive sport.
Yeah.
But football, soccer, you just need a ball, and sometimes they even make a makeshift ball to play. So
yeah, of course, everybody starts off at a different level, so that's good to know. So there you go, Ross. There's some worldwide experience on soccer, which is your favorite thing. All right. Well, John, it's a pleasure to have you on the show today. And I've thoroughly enjoyed getting to know you over these last few months, and getting to hear about, what's happening in Canada, in the space that you're in. So how long have you been in collections?
Oh, good Lord. 36 years.
Okay.
I won't forget that number because I got married the same year in 1988.
Right.
It's been a long time if you really think about it. But it's funny. Sometimes it seems like a very long time ago, and sometimes it just seems like yesterday. It's an odd thing because I've just been so entrenched and absorbed in it for so long. But yeah, 36 years, long time.
Yeah, when the bug bites and it gets you, then time goes quick, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how did you get into the collections business?
I imagine, like a lot of people, through kind of dumb luck, stumbled into it.
Everyone says that.
Everybody wakes up thinking that they want to become a bill collector
No.
in that industry. But Yeah, I literally stumbled into it because I needed work. I had my father passed away during my first year university, so financially things got difficult for me. So I worked a lot throughout university, and in most of my work it was like performance-based work, like commission sales. I sold just about everything you could
Right.
possibly tried everything, and that's what I did. And then when I graduated, um, I tried to stay on that path, and it was very difficult because the jobs weren't coming up as easily, and staying on top of the sales cycle and continuing that regular paycheck, so to speak, was very difficult. So I
Mm.
found myself going to an employment agency, and voila, the first job I got was collecting money. I think it was a home fuel oil company. It was at night calling delinquent accounts, and just one thing led to another, and yeah, that's how I got my first taste of it. Because back then, credit was just coming along. Like my son's just finishing university now, and right from the get-go, I think even in high school when he was applying, he was already getting, credit card applications. Back
Yeah.
then, we couldn't even apply for one. So
Yeah.
credit was something that was foreign to me. And also as being immigrants when we moved into Canada, my parents, they never thought about credit. They always felt if they didn't have the money, it wasn't going to be bought.
Yeah. Yeah. My parents were the same. Yeah. It's a different generation, right?
Absolutely.
So, okay. So you transferred your sales skills to your collection skills, which is actually quite a kind of easy transition if you were going to transfer skills, because obviously in collections you're kind of selling the opportunity to get the debt paid and get it off the books, get it off the as a headache for the person. So I can see you doing that. And obviously you've built that into a single point, and you're the executive vice president for the company, right?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay. And looking at your website, and it's a great website you've got as a single point. You've got a very clear process where you've got, I think I'm right in saying you've got the Credit Bureau of Canada Collections, the Collection Group of Canada, and then the General Revenue Corp. So you've consolidated a number of different facets of credit into into your single point, which I think is a great name, by the way. I love the name. So tell us about that. How did that come about?
Um, the journey was extremely interesting for me, actually, when I think about it. Um, when I transitioned from and got that first job as a collector for a company, that just led to getting a full-time job. So it was an evening position initially, went into a full-time job. And it wasn't that I was making lots of money, but I was having a great time because of the business itself. There was a lot of
Right.
other employees that were my age, and it was just a fun place to be. So
Good.
stayed there for a while. And then another employment agency came to me for another job, which actually is what led me to a company called Creditel of Canada Limited. So that's how it kind of started. And
Right.
Creditel was a great training ground for me. And I think anyone that graduated through that network, that company, would say the same thing. It was a not-for-profit commercial credit reporting and commercial collection agency. And it was actually originally founded, I think, in 1910 as the Canadian Men's Credit Association. And that really laid the groundwork for everything I did after that, which led into the entrepreneurship and jumping over
Yeah.
to Collect Sense Inc., which is the legal name of the whole entity.
Yeah.
Was really from that point. But I got to tell you, it wasn't all rosy. Like right from the get-go, when I joined Creditel, I was thinking to myself, what the heck have I done? Because I went from a relatively good job to a sales position in something called the collection industry, well, actually a credit reporting and collection industry, and I'd never seen something as aggressive as it was. I remember walking into the collection floor for the first time, which was about 3 or 4 days into my training session, and I was thinking, oh my God, like it was a madhouse. First of all, you couldn't see anything or breathe because it was so smoky. Everybody had two cigarettes going. There was a cigarette in their hand and another one in the ashtray.
Yeah.
They were screaming from the top of their lungs. We're talking mid eight or late 80s, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Very Wall
And
Street,
yeah,
Wolf on Wall Street kind of.
it was crazy. And I
Yeah.
remember thinking, what have I gotten myself into? And And then things started settling down when I realized what the industry was like. And of course, there's been a massive change
Mm,
since then with regulations and
mm,
client expectations and
mm.
privacy and all that kind of stuff. But the point is that was an amazing training ground for me. And it was very aggressive. I started that employment with I think 14 other people. And within 3 weeks, there was only like five of us. And they were what I meant by aggressive is that they gave you great training but they didn't have their expectation was that you had to succeed. So you were given 3 months to make quota, and if you didn't, there was no questions asked. You were moving out the door, and they start off with a new set of people coming in the training side. And it was, I remember being told that I was kind of unique because they generally hired salespeople and trained them on collections as opposed to
Right.
hiring someone that had a collection background and trained them on sales. And I guess I was lucky because I was kind of self-taught in sales because I always did sales jobs. Uh,
Yes.
but yeah, so anyway, so that led to everything, and I eventually started. So the company was eventually sold to Equifax Canada,
Right.
which everybody knows. So the Equifax,
Yeah.
it was a Canadian version, and I became part of Credit Bureau Vancouver, and that's really where my journey started. And interestingly enough, John Finley, who is the president and CEO of our company, the founder, he actually worked at that company as a bill collector once, but we didn't cross. It's just
Okay.
funny and coincidental that later
Okay.
on in life that we found that we actually worked at the same place. Um, anyway, so from there, we became the Credit Bureau of Vancouver became a standalone collection agency, and this is all tie in, I promise. Became a standalone collection agency because the owners sold the credit reporting division to Equifax Canada, and so that journey came along, and eventually we started opening up offices throughout the country, and I transferred to Toronto to open up the Toronto office, and that's how I met John Finley, who was the founder of Collect Sense Inc. And we met when we were both sitting on the board at the Ontario Society of Collection Agencies, which today is called the Canadian Society of Collection Agencies. And everything else is history from that point on. So January 2005, I joined forces with him. At the time, we were, I think, 27 employees. Today, we're right around the 1,000 mark. Some days it's a little over, some days a little less. And and that's how it's come along. And it's been a really wonderful journey. And how the things diversified was exactly that. Over the years, we realized that to really survive and grow, it couldn't be just collections. And keep in
Mm.
mind, Canada's a huge country, but we're relatively small. I
What is the
mean,
population? What is the population?
it's under 50 million. It's about
Okay.
1/10 of the US.
Right.
But it's 1/10 of the US in terms of population, but in terms of business mindset, it's very conservative. I mean, the US has almost 5,000 or 6,000 banks.
Mm.
Canada has 37. I'm talking about
Ooh.
banks. We have 37 banks. Only five of them are what we call Schedule One banks, which are the big boys. Well, there is a sixth that's kind of up. If you talk to some Canadians and ask how many Schedule One banks we have, most will say five, some will say six, because there's a smaller one that kind of fallen into that category. But it's relatively small from that perspective. So we had to diversify. And Single Point came about because Collect Sense or Credit Bureau of Canada collections for third-party collections wasn't a good branding when you're going after first-party outsourcing work. And
Right.
that's what came about. And then as time went on, Collection Group of Canada was an acquisition. It was a large commercial collection agency. And then in 2019, we purchased General Revenue Corp, which is an American company, which is an interesting story in itself because that was the collection wing of Navient. Navient is a publicly traded company in the US, and their history comes from the U.S. federal student loans program. So
Okay.
that federal government started a company called Sallie Mae, and Sallie
Yes.
Mae eventually separated into the Sallie Mae Bank, which
Yeah.
funded the loans, and then Navient was the company that serviced and collected the loans.
Right.
And General Revenue Corporation was the collection agency that they founded, and then eventually they wanted to divest from that, and we were lucky enough to purchase it in
And,
2000.
and so you are that's a great outline of how you've diversified the business. And so you are sitting in Toronto today, right?
I am.
Right. Okay. Because obviously, for those of us that are not Canadian, we got to get our geography points, and obviously Vancouver is on the other side of the country, right on the west coast, and that's a beautiful city. And I've had the pleasure of coming to Toronto, so I know that how hospitable Canadians are. Lovely people from the time that I spent in Canada. So you've basically been able to consolidate by acquisition and meeting people on your journey into single point. And I have to say, well done on the diversification and the branding. Again, I think your website really comes through in the customer journey. And it's interesting because collection companies do need to have, they are a bit of a one-trick pony, and if they can find outlets to diversify into that mean something to their audience, this is the great way to build revenue and to build brand. So yeah, I can understand the sense of that completely. Now you're in Canada, and for me as a Brit, we think of North America. Now, obviously, I know there are a lot of differences between Canadians and Americans, of course. But it's always, because you are part of the same continent landmass, I suppose we think that there is so many similarities. And of course, you have your own domestic legislation. And does it bear any resemblance to US regulation, or is it totally separate in its approach?
I think there's some resemblance because both countries put a lot of merit on what we call consumer protectionism.
Right.
And I think sometimes they lose sight of the other side of the coin, which is fairness to businesses, the companies that are losing the money because of bad debt. But no, it's very different. US is very litigious. Canadians, again, are much more conservative. And then in Canada, our biggest struggle is that we've got 13 provinces and territories, and each one of them have their own set of rules, their own legislation, and they're completely unique in that they're run differently, they view things differently. And even though there are some similarities within the act in terms of what we can and cannot do as a collection agency to affect recovery, things are very different and they're challenging. And then you add to it, Canada's got 6 different time zones with a 4.5 hour difference across the country. So even minor things like allowable calling hours. Some provinces allow you to start calling from 7 o'clock in the morning. Others don't allow you to call until 8 o'clock in the morning. Some allow you to call till 10 o'clock at night. Others allow you to call only till 9 o'clock at night. And then again, you add into it all those the different regions, and all of a sudden you could have mistakenly a collector calling a BC number at 8 o'clock Toronto time, and it's 5 a.m. their time. They're waking somebody up. Technology has changed with automation to make sure those type of compliance issues don't happen anymore. But those are some of the challenges from a minor perspective. But it's really a struggle any way you look at it, because sometimes there's no logic behind the rules. And then there's different governing bodies that put their nose into it that cause issues. So not only do we have 13 different collection legislation to abide by, but then you add in privacy. You've got different statutes of limitations across the country. You've got the CRTC, which is a Canadian Radio, Television and Radio Commission that comes into play for any type of communication, electronic communications like cell phones and auto dialers and leaving messages. And they can cause you a lot of grief. I remember a number of years back when Canada was struggling through a lot of complaints from telemarketers. The CRTC came in and said, okay, and changed the rule and said anyone that's leaving a message has to identify themselves and advise and let the recipient know the purpose of their calls. Well, that's completely contrary to what the Collection Agencies Act says because of privacy. You don't want to disclose the nature of your to someone else that may pick up that call. And the CRTC was actually fining agencies. So for a period of about 2.5 years before we got it cleared up and straightened, there were some collection agencies that got fined in the 6-figure range. It was really, really, really a crazy period. And of course, mobility companies, and in Canada at the time we only had 3, all very large, unlike the US that have a lot of them. Because the CRT is one of the regulators, they imposed that demand on us, which really meant that we couldn't use dialers anymore.
Right.
Because we were worried about, getting fines, of course, but what was bigger concern was getting our license suspended so you couldn't operate. So the only way we could continue to work collection files is no longer use a dialer, for example, for the mobility industry.
And does any of this legislation, does it come out of central government? Or is it completely state driven?
It's completely, we call them provinces. So we have provinces
Provinces.
and territories, and it's all 13 provinces and territories. Interestingly enough, because you'd think for something like this, which is relatively important, I think, coming out of the financial institutions, you think there would be a national rule. So
Mm,
federally legislated and federally
mm,
ruled. And they actually tried. I was lucky enough to sit on something called the Debt Collection Advisory Committee for the British Columbia government back in, I think it was 2000. Yeah, it was 2006 to 2012. And it was a great appointment. I was the only one that was from out of the province. And it was a huge learning experience for me. But one of the things I tackled was trying to change a part of the act in British Columbia. And that was having the requirement to send a notice before you
right.
started calling and
Yeah.
have a notice waiting period before you started calling. So in BC at the time, which is still the case, you had to send a notice and you had to wait 5 full days before you made any outbound attempts. That
Right.
was the rule. And while I was looking to help change that or make some recommendations, I was given the okay to contact the different registrars across the country. So I got to know a lot of them and learned a lot about this particular gadget. So there was a mandate from the federal government to try to start something that a federal set of rules, but it died because every province and territory, from what I could gather, felt that they wanted to protect their interests, um, and that was more important than coming together with a set of rules that everyone could agree to. And every
Mm,
time one particular rule was, one province or territory or region would cave into it, they would change it again. The whoever was demanding it. It was just ridiculous and silly, and then it died. So I don't ever see that that's ever going to change. So we're kind of stuck to it.
yeah. Yeah. Well,
And like I said,
if it's any consolation, I think the world in all of its different jurisdictions and um setups, it's the same conversation that uh the federal national governments have an overarching kind of agenda, but it's actually down to individual states, regions. We have that in the UK now. We have four nations effectively all trying to legislate in their own country. The only problem with our country is that our regions are probably I mean, like pocket size compared to Canada or United States in terms of geography. Um, but anyway, I think what you're seeing in Canada is the same the world over. If that gives you, it's cold consolation, but I think
mm,
it is the same. Um, and in terms of during COVID, I mean, how did that impact on your business? How did it impact on Canada's credit industry? What was the impact of that?
in a word, it changed everything.
Did it?
Yeah, there's no question about it. Um, when it first happened, I think everyone in our industry thought the world was caving in,
Mm-hmm.
that we're not going to be able to operate. There's going to be a cutoff of revenue. What are we going to do? It was a really a very, very stressful time. Um, so the first thing that happened was when they shut us down, we had to send everybody home, which was a huge challenge because one, you had to appease the regulatory bodies because technically we were supposed to work from the premises that were licensed.
Yeah,
Um, Two, we had to appease our clients who in many cases had higher standards, whether it came to data security, privacy compliance, disaster recovery, even things like call recordings and,
sure.
all that kind of stuff, physical.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then there was how to do it. How do we send the people home and have it in a secured environment, still be able to use our technology to be able to monitor them? And we're an ISO company and a SOC 2 Type 2 certified, so we had to abide by all those. And I think we did the right thing. We did it right from the get-go. We sent everybody home with our own equipment, put them on a VPN network, so they were still able to be logged into our dialers. We were able to still have call recording. And in some cases, we had to put cameras in each individual's home. We have
Yeah.
some financial institutions that required a camera. So
Yeah.
when we were in the office, they were segregated in a separate room, and there had to be cameras around.
Yeah.
And even though the equipment had recording devices disabled, they just wanted to have, an extra level of control to make sure people aren't using a cell phone to record private
Yeah.
information.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
All those things. So the bank, so those clients that we had collectors going home, there's a camera sitting above them, looking at their screen.
Yeah.
Um, so from that perspective, it was a huge learning experience. And then of course there's all the software to monitor what they're doing, keystrokes, how much time they're spending on working, all that kind of stuff. But the biggest surprise was the behavior of the customers, of the debtors, especially in 2020 and 2021. To our surprise, they continued to pay and even paid at a higher level.
Yeah.
So it was actually shocking. And if I think back about it, I think it was because it was kind of like a perfect storm. We all, as everyone knows, we have our natural peaks and valleys throughout the year. And in
Mm-hmm.
Canada, because of income tax returns, March, April are great, recovery months. And this happened in March, April. So
Mm.
people were getting laid off. They were getting severance packages and vacation pays when they were being sent home. The government started giving COVID pay. Yeah. Um, and then
Yeah.
there was income tax return.
Yeah.
So they're getting all this extra money. What was really surprising was the behavior. We still thought that people's behavior was going to be, with all the uncertainty, that they're going to hoard all that money and save,
Yeah. Yeah.
but they use that money to pay off debt.
Okay.
And it was crazy. Like it
Who
went,
knew?
who
Yeah.
knew?
Yeah. Well, I'm
So
glad there was a silver lining in there.
there
Yeah.
was.
Yeah.
The part that became a problem afterwards is you opened up the Pandora's box. People are now used to working from home. Well, why wouldn't you? You're saving all that commute time. And in the metropolitan Toronto area, people are commuting well over 60 minutes one way.
Mm-hmm.
It's not unheard of. So
No.
it's a lot of expense and time. Um, and I think if we're legislated to come back to the office, if we're mandated to come back to the office by certain clients, we're going to lose our best collectors because they're going to find somewhere else to work. I absolutely see that. And then of course we had the time when we couldn't find people to work. Everything's going great. We need more employees and we can't hire people fast enough. We're giving out hiring bonuses, right? A bonus for signing, a stay bonus if you pass your probationary period. Wages are already higher. And even under that, for at least 18, 19, 20 months, we had a rough time hiring people.
Yeah.
So it was a struggle. And
Yes,
like I
I
said, the
think the
biggest
world has changed for anyone that wants to mandate people should work from an office. The genie is out of the bottle.
it really is. The thing is, any way you look at it, the people that are good at working from home, their productivity is higher.
Yeah.
They're much higher. And the ones that aren't, we threaten to bring them in and then it comes back up. Whether
Yeah.
it's quality work or quantity of work, I mean, it comes back up.
Yeah.
I think the biggest concern right now is still if the legislators, 13 provinces and territories, decide that they're going to mandate the collectors back in the premises with their license is going to be a problem. And then, like I said, if our major financial institutions, which are the big ones, if they mandate the collectors to come back to the office, then that's going to be a problem.
Sometimes you have to wonder who these people are. Do they live in the real world? When they decide to make these kind of mandates. We have the same debate in the UK, and really it's a power struggle between employers and employees, really. And as you say, if you want to get good employees, you're going to have to bend now because, as I said, the genie's out of the bottle. So I wish you luck on that. It sounds like you've got a very pragmatic approach to the problem, and with your diversification and everything else you've done in the company, you handled COVID, as we all had to do, in the best way possible. And I'm sure some of your ISO standards enabled you to have resilience built into your process. So I wish you luck with, the continued environment. And sounds like you're a good company to work for. You've got an open mind to it, which is great to hear. That's important. So we're out of COVID now, thank God. Let's hope that doesn't, or nothing like that hits us again. Certainly not well, I can't speak for you, but certainly in my working lifetime, I only need one COVID. Thank you very much. What is the collection climate like now in Canada, now that things are getting back to some kind of normality?
Um, Getting back to a little bit of sense of normality because COVID is over, and when we've kind of settled into how we're going about doing business, but the climate is now a little bit challenging because of the economy, with
Right.
inflation and interest rates. Um, Interest rates is a big one. I mean, it's been running rampant for a little bit now, but we've got it's all over the news. I think 23 to 20 or 29% of mortgages are going to be coming up for renewal in the next 15 to 16 months.
Yeah.
And so people are going to be in a world of hurt. And this is
Mm.
above and beyond any other debts they may be carrying. And we've been carrying large amounts of credit card and loan debt as well. So and these are people that at the time were pretty stretched and were pretty much at the top end of what they could afford. And I think that's going to be a struggle.
Yeah.
We've all been kind of cringing about is there going to be or isn't there going to be a recession? And of course, if people behave a certain way, it's going to come true just because of their behavior. Um, so we're already seeing volumes increase in terms of assignments, but liquidation is going down, which means that it's less profitable. So we have to struggle through that. We've had peaks and valleys, of course, I mean, throughout my 36 years of being in the business, but it's different now. So it's going to be a little bit more challenging, and I will see what happens. It's different now because of the environment. The whole collection environment in Canada has been morphing, has been running a certain way because of just how things have transpired in the country. I think the biggest trend that we've been facing over the last 10, 15 years is pricing. Our clients, the prospects, have just wanted more and they've wanted for less.
Yeah.
And it's difficult to do without um, hurting the service level piece. I truly believe, and I say this all the time, pricing is the single greatest obstacle to getting good service. I mean, there's no question in my mind.
Yeah.
In the
Okay.
service industry, it's different than if I was buying, the analogy that I'll always use is if you're buying a car and you have two cars from two dealerships and they have identically the same options and everything, I get the price will be a big, big component or maybe the major component. Yeah, why not? It's the same product. But in service, it's different, especially in collections. You're going to get what you pay for. Collection agencies are not a charity. We're in business to make a profit.
Yeah.
You're not going to lose money in running something, and you're certainly not going to do it for long if you run into a problem. So that's a big challenge. And I constantly talk about net back to people and show illustrations of it. Sometimes they understand, sometimes they don't. But I see RFPs coming out now where pricing is 40, sometimes 50% of the weighted score. I don't even bother responding anymore because what are you going to do?
Yeah. Yeah. I can understand that. And pricing is always a challenge in any business. I don't care which business you're in. It's getting that pricing right that's palatable to the customer and obviously works to the bottom line of your business is a challenge. And that's universal, I think.
Mhm.
Everybody has that. Jeff Bezos has that. Elon Musk has that. Everybody has that.
Absolutely.
Um, Go ahead.
No, I think the other challenge right now, which is also exciting, is technology. I mean,
Mhm.
had some great technological change over the last 10, 15 years. That's really helped the business. Um, Case in point, the compliance piece. I mean, just postal code filters to make sure that we
Yeah.
don't make outbound calls on a different time zone, as a classic example. But this AI thing, I mean, I might constantly marvel. I just constantly marvel. Every time
I
I get
understand.
another demo, my jaw's just hitting the ground.
Yeah.
We're utilizing some and we're comparing it versus other technologies that we have and things. But this machine learning thing is it's I don't know what's going to happen, but it's exciting and scary at the same time.
Yeah. Well, again, I would say I'm the same age as you. So I would say that for the next 10, 15, 20 years, ride the storm of AI. And perhaps when we decide we've had enough, then that'll be somebody else's problem. That's the way that I'm looking at AI. I just think it's helping businesses now munch through tons of data, and you must have a phenomenal amount of data in single point. And I can only imagine that machine learning is chomping through that and giving you outcomes that would have taken days and days of months of programming, and now suddenly you're getting the answers very, very quickly. So that's good. Of course, there's always the Terminator kind of apocalyptic outcome of AI, but I'm afraid that that's not in our control.
No, it's not.
That's
You're going to
somebody
have
else's control.
We're developing a whole department now that's just concentrating on technology.
Really
Yeah,
good for
it's
you. Yeah.
it's I think it's the only way that we're going to be able to survive.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think you have to embrace it. And certainly at Congress, we're going to be having sections on AI and talking about AI in the global credit arena, because obviously what AI also does is it creates a shrinking world in terms of process in the credit industry across the world. You know, whichever segment of that you happen to be in, this machine learning is kind of joining up the dots between how, you know, different systems, different approaches, and there's a lot of sharing to do in terms of how to make best use of it. So I think that's a positive.
You know, Claire, it's one of the reasons why this World Credit Congress, I think, is such a wonderful, wonderful thing. It gives you an avenue of, because we're all facing the same challenges. Many
Yeah.
times while we've been talking, you've been telling me that I'm not, it's not isolated to Canada, that it's happening
Yeah.
everywhere else. And I think the scariest thing right now, or one of the biggest challenges that's going to come to fruition, is that as technology, and we already see it, as technology progresses, the legislation and the regulatory bodies aren't keeping up. I mean, even stuff that's happened already is not keeping up.
Mm.
In the three largest provinces in this country, we have a requirement to send a notice and wait 5 full days before we can make an outbound call. But those same three provinces have changed legislation to allow us to send the first notice by email, which is instantaneous. Why should we have to wait 5 days?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that's just it's one simple, very illustrative example of how legislation is just not keeping up with the times. They made the change to allow us to send an email as a first notice. Why not, see the whole picture and make the change of changing
Yeah.
the waiting period? It's
I think
silly.
it's because sometimes, and you've sat on government boards and been able to influence the discussion. And I have been the same. I have been able to sit on government policy making boards and look at the practicalities of what is being suggested by policy officials who are not experts in the field, but are experts in legislation. I'll give them that, and then apply it to our industry and try and make a working model out of that. And, so I encourage you and, many of the senior people coming to Congress to have a voice around these types of issues, because honestly, from what I see from legislators, if we don't say something, they will just put it together how they think it should work without the voice of any kind of expertise in their, in their thought process. So I'm glad to hear that you're getting involved. And also the other way that I've always worked with legislators is, okay, you give me a framework. How can we navigate that to make that work? Like you were saying about, you're going to serve the notice by email. Okay, that's what we've got now. So how do we make that work? And just being creative with whatever framework you're given, as opposed to just accepting it. And I'm sure you do that in Single Point all the time. What about mentors? I mean, you like I've had mentors in my career and been lucky enough to have them. How about you? Who are your mentors in your journey?
Oh my goodness. I've had many, and I look at mentors as people that have taught me things, have kind of taken me under the wings to keep me um, um, focused. And there have been many. Most of them have been from my employers in the
Yeah.
past.
Yes.
But I also have had ton of people that have just helped me along the way at so many different stages. I mean, right back from the Creditel days, the company that I worked for, where it was so aggressive. There was a senior salesperson there, and I think and her name was Pam Bale. And I haven't seen Pam Bale for a number of years.
Yeah.
But she's still in the industry, and but she's very specialized in the construction collections and construction credit
Right.
reporting. Um, And she also was one that came to Creditel from a collections background as opposed to a sales background. And I think maybe for that reason, she kind of took me under her arm. She even came with me on my first sales call. It was Girl
Oh,
Guides Canada.
oh,
And you know what? That call itself was a very big learning experience for me because that call taught me that you can use credit information not just for assessing risk on a potential client, but they were using it to assess risk on a potential vendor.
yeah,
As you can imagine, Girl Guides
yeah,
had a great reputation. They wanted to buy something. They wanted to make sure the vendor they were buying from had a good reputation, was financially sound, and they were
sure.
using that. It was very, very different. It was the first time I experienced that. Anyway, she came on that call with me, and I got the contract. And I think that did a world of difference for my confidence. She taught me a lot during that call as well. She always kind of stayed in touch, so she would be one of the biggest one. The vice president of credit reporting of that company's name is Ian McDonald, who I still keep in touch with all the time, was a big one. John Finley, our president and CEO, my partner in many ways, although
Yeah.
he's the majority shareholder. He's taught me so much and has been a mentor in so many different ways throughout the years. We're very different. We're like yin and yang. I wear my emotions on my sleeve, and he's very cool, calm, cool, and collected. And he's also a banker. I mean, although he
Okay.
had a stint as a third-party collector at one time, um, he works 18 years in the banking industry, managing collections and managing collection agencies until one day he decided, I think I can make a go of this. And I think the story goes he went from the ivory tower to a 10 by 10 room.
Uh-huh. Oh, good for
Trying to get
him.
it right. Yeah,
Good for him to
absolutely.
apply his knowledge and experience in the real
Absolutely.
job.
Absolutely. It was him that wanted to do the ISO 9001 2008 to start with. I remember when he first brought it up and said, "Hey, let's think about doing this." It was probably 2006 or seven. We didn't do it till 2009. And I said, no, no, no. Why? That's a lot of money. Why? But because John was such an amazing administrator. And I thought, well, why
Mm.
would we do that? Because it's all about quality management, 9001.
Hmm.
Anyway, so eventually we did, and it was an amazing thing because I remember almost immediately after we got that designation, there was an RFP, and one of the questions was, "Do you have a quality statement? Do you have a quality management system?"
Yeah.
And of course, not
Yeah.
just that, but it was amazing for us because, especially as we grew, because it kept us on track, and it gave us a model for how we
Yeah.
should proceed with everything. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's great to hear that you've got that in place and have adopted ISO as part of your overall framework in various ways. That's exactly how that gives you that kind of touchstone of quality and process that you can follow and repeat as you take on a new piece of business. So I'm
There
just
was one more that I should mention because it's not someone that's tangible. It's a gentleman by name of Todd Gross. I've never met him, but years and years ago, and I don't even know when he wrote the article, but I first got hold of the article in maybe 1999. Oh, no, I'm talking 1990 or so. But he wrote an article called "An Ounce of Prevention is Worth a Pound of Cure," and he was a credit manager someplace in
right.
the US. And I remember years and years later, it was probably like 9, 10 years ago. I tried to find him because I found the name of the company and he had retired. And I left a message to see if I can get something because I was so grateful. And the reason it was part of my sales journey and sales training. I had been taught right from the get-go when someone says, when should I assign an account for collections? It was 90 days. I don't know if that's true in your world, but I'm talking back in the late 80s
Yeah.
when I first got on board. And that's all I knew. And I would just, when people used to ask, or I would always demand, give me your 90 days plus stuff. And I never knew why. But when I read Todd Gross's article, it taught me about preventative collection or in-house people working their files from the left as opposed to the right. His concept was you get more return on your investment on your time if you call people that are current 30 and 60 versus calling people that are 90
Yeah,
and
yeah,
beyond.
you can
Because
see
you spend
that.
more time dialing, leaving messages, not getting hold of all that kind of stuff. Anyways, and that article led me to become more of a trainer as opposed to a salesperson. So
Right.
I think if anything from a mentorship perspective, although it was someone that I'd never met, is this guy named Todd Gross.
Okay. Send me the details for that. I want to put that in the show notes
Sure.
because other people may those kinds of nuggets get lost, don't they? So we'll put that in the show notes and just have it appended to your interview. That would be great. So, John, what's next for John Kim and Single Point?
Oh, good Lord. I have no idea. I think this excitement about automation with AI is going to be a big thing.
Yeah.
Going to do a fair amount of focus on that. Otherwise, it's just, put your head to the ground and just, forging forward. We have great people at the business. Um, I think one of the things that I'd like to do, which I don't know if it's even possible, is try to get some culture back in. There's a lot of things that have happened. So even with COVID, although we've benefited from from work at home, and I didn't mention this, but we were lucky enough to have one of our offices lease come up, so we let that go. An office with 180 seats in Mississauga, Ontario, which used to be our head office, was basically a ghost town. Our Toronto office, which has 650 seats, is like a ghost town. I think at any time when I go there, there's less than 50 people in there.
Right.
But the Mississauga office, the lease was coming up, so we were lucky enough to be able to shed that.
Yeah.
So that was great. But uh, the all the changes coming to fruition is probably the biggest part of the next steps on how we're going to deal with it going forward.
Yeah. No, I'm excited for you. As I said, I see the positioning of your brand and the distinct elements of your cycle, and I think that's a very strong structure that you can add in more business into in a clear message. So well done in getting that out there. I look forward to seeing you in Orlando in October. You've been an early supporter of the Congress from Canada, which must be represented at the Congress, as we are in the United States this year. We must have one of our closest neighbours there and represented. And I hope that some of your countrymen and women might follow you down to Orlando for a couple of days of Congress and maybe a couple of days of vacay as well on the end. So it's going to be great to see you and meet you in person and to hear you on the panel discussions with ACA. I think you'll enjoy, if you haven't already met the ACA International folk, they have 56 lobbyists working in Washington, doing what we were talking earlier about, trying to put their point of view across to the policy officials before it becomes legislation. So they work very hard on that. I think that's an interesting concept for other people around the world to hear how the Americans are challenging these types of decisions. So I think you'll take a lot away from that. So John, thank you so much for joining me today. We're going to put all of John's website information, collectsense.com, and his LinkedIn profile. So please join up with him, particularly if you're part of the WCCE community. This is a great guy to meet, and you'll have a connection for somebody out of Canada. I really am excited to meet you, John. And for everybody else, please visit shergroup.com, which is our main site. We are the hosts for the World Credit Congress this year. And we are looking after the steering committee of Luis Perez, Declan Flood, Eugene Joubert, and Joseph Bustil. So that's our interest in the Congress. Plus, we have a long history of being in the sharp end of credit. So we'll be sharing that with the audience come October. So, John, thank you so much for today and sharing your journey. You've had a great journey, and I'm glad that you conquered COVID and have come out the other side excited.
Thank you so much, Claire. It's nice to be with you today, and I'm really looking forward to the Congress. And before I go, Ross, goodbye. Thank you for watching, and go Norwich City, go.
Great. And do you support a soccer team? Just so he knows what that is.
We have a local team that's called the Toronto FC.
Toronto FC.
Yeah, so they play in the North American Soccer League here. Yeah.
Okay, that's one more that you know about, Ross. So yeah, thank you very much. Okay, John, great to see you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Share Groupie podcast. To join our Share Groupie community, subscribe by going to our website at www.sharegroup.com. Keep up with the latest Share Group news across all our main channels, including YouTube, LinkedIn, and across all social media. Stay connected and begin building more business relationships.